Hi, I'm a stake indexing director, and today I'd like to take a look at some of the obituary projects in FamilySearch Indexing. The obituary projects are really interesting. They're some of the most interesting projects that I've worked on so far, but they're pretty complicated. There are a lot of little rules that you need to be aware of and follow, and it won't be possible in one video to show you absolutely everything because there are many different special cases that simply won't come up in every batch that you get. So we'll look at a few and hopefully we'll be able to show you some of the tricky things and some of the basics so that you can do these obituary projects correctly. So we'll go ahead and start. I have a couple downloaded here. We'll look at this one from Hawaii. Work on batch. The Hawaii ones that I've seen so far are probably among the easiest obituaries. They are usually just computer printouts, so they're very easy to read. Here we go. You see what it looks like. And there's usually not, they're usually pretty short, not as much information as in some of the other obituary projects. So first of all, we need to, of course, mark all of these image types. I'll just go through and quickly mark them as normal. We've looked at them all. They're all normal. And there's no duplicates. Okay, we go into form entry and make sure you adjust the size of the type so that it's clear for you. The first record type, so record type here, we have three record types that we need to index. One is for the deceased themselves, then any relatives and any non-relatives. And just because they're listed this way in the record type, that doesn't mean that's the order in which you need to index them. So we need to index all of the people mentioned in the obituary in the order in which they appear in the obituary. So we'll see what that means. But basically, you don't need to go by this order here. The deceased does always come first, though. So first the deceased. Then we see here is the deceased's name. And sometimes you need to read through all of the text to find the information. Okay, in this case we have a nickname. This is what you do with the nickname or Benji. So you don't use those quotation marks. Use or. Okay, surname Ventura. And it's pink. That just means that it's an entry which the system doesn't recognize. It's a rare entry, rare name. I mean, of course, most people aren't named or Benji, so, but that's fine because it's correct. It'll just ask us in the quality control to double check that. Okay, titles and terms. So this is where sometimes you need to really look through the whole obituary and make sure that it's not mentioned somewhere that it says Mr. or Mrs. somewhere later on, and it doesn't in this case. Okay, gender. We can't guess the gender from the name. We need to look and find, okay, here it says he. So we know it's a man from that, or if it had said Mr. somewhere. Okay, age, that's here, 45. Death month, that tells us right here, died December 12th, 1988. And by the way, if the exact death date was not given in the obituary, then you would take the next closest date. So, for example, if it hadn't said that here, then we would take the date of publication of the obituary. Okay, but it does tell us, that's fine. Next, death, town, or city. And we notice here it says he was of Kailua Kona, but that just means that's where he lived. It doesn't tell us where he died. So we cannot assume that he died in the place where he lived. Maybe he was in a hospital in a larger city. We don't know. Maybe he was somewhere else entirely. So we have to leave that completely blank unless it actually says where the person died. Okay, then says he was born in Hilo, but it doesn't say the date, so we leave the date empty. Birth town or city, Hilo. And even though we know this was in Hawaii, we can't put Hawaii here because it doesn't say it, so we leave that blank. Name of the newspaper, that's up here. It is the Honolulu Advertiser. Okay, and so we go on to the next record. There's always 11 records set for every image. So we're going to need to deal with all of them. Okay, the next person mentioned is survived by sister. Okay, so and here's the sister's name. Sister is a relative. Okay, sister. Given names. Now, this is one of those complicated cases. So she's Mrs. Henry Aniu. I'm sorry, I'm probably not pronouncing these right. And this in parentheses means, so Geraldine, that was her actual name, and Henry was her husband. You know, this is just a convention of how a name of a married woman is written. But in this case, what we do, what the instructions tell us to do, is we should write her actual name, her surname, and her title or term. And the name of the husband does not get indexed. I know a lot of people complain about this and say the information's being lost, and it's true, and I agree with that, but the rules simply tell us not to do that. And you can find, by the way, there's a ton of rules. You can go over here, project instructions, click here for a presentation. You're going to get a PDF file. It's pretty long, many, many pages. We won't look at it now, but you need to read through all of that, and there's examples in there of exactly this case. Or a video presentation gives you the same information. Again, pretty long. You should look at that yourself. Okay. So that's that person. Next, so again, we don't index the Henry. Next is the brother. Again, relative. Brother Julian Quint. Okay. Next comes the stepfather. Again, a relative. And step parents are indexed as the same as any other parent, so there's no special stepfather relationship. By the way, the relationships are all listed here. You can go to the drop-down list and see. And you see that when we get to the S's, there's no step relative. So stepfather is just father, stepsister would just be sister, and so on. Okay. Francisco Quint. Okay, next we have, it says friends, but there's no name there. And the name of the mortuary also does not get indexed. Okay, and that's all. Now we see, like I said, we have 11 lines. We need to do something with these, so the rest of them are simply going to get blanked. So, and no more records. Okay, and then we go on to the next one. So that's an example of a fairly easy obituary. I will close this now. I'll come back and finish that myself later, because right now I want to look at a different type of obituary. That's this Idaho obituary. The Idaho ones, the Idaho project is different in that you get many, many different kinds of records. Okay, so we see here, for example, here's one kind of record. You get these kind of printouts from cemetery records. Then you can also get something like this, where you've got, there's a memorial service program, there's an obituary from a newspaper, and there's some header information, so this is a kind of messy one. And again, for this, you would just go through, start at the top, and index, so first the deceased, the parents' names, the spouses' names, and then you go over here and start indexing all of these names, all of these people who participated in the memorial service, non-relatives. Then you go and add in the information from the obituary, so it's quite complicated. And we'll just look at this one now. Here's a funeral service record. Okay, so we'll go ahead and do this one, just as an example. Okay, make it a little bigger. So, normal, yes, and once again we start with the deceased, always. And we have her given names, Ella, Catherine, and now we see there's several more names here. And if we had no other information, then we would go ahead and index it like this. Okay? If we had no other information, we cannot assume that any of these are surnames. We have to index them as given names. But we do have more information. So we go down here a little farther, and we see that her father's name was George Messick. So we know that Messick was, at one point in her life, her surname. This is her maiden name. So we can go back now. I'm going to take out this Messick Belnap and put it down here. Okay, so we can only do this because we have this additional information that her father's name was Messick. So we know that her maiden name was Messick. Belnap, we don't have any further information about where she got that Belnap from. We assume it was one of her husbands. But since it comes after Belnap in her name up here, then we know that it was also a surname. Okay, so that's what we do with that. Titles or terms, it doesn't say Mrs. or anything like that on here anywhere. Okay, gender. Now we cannot assume that this is a woman. I've been saying she because we know it is, but we can't index that it's a woman unless we find some information, and here we have sex F. Okay. Age is here, 90. So on these, you have to just search all over to find the information. Death month, we have here the date of death is March 12th, 1982. Place of death, it says here Riverview Nursing, and that's not a city, county, or state, so we cannot enter that unless it says something else farther down, but it doesn't look like it does. Okay, so that gets left empty. Birth month, I saw that was up here at the top here, October 17th, 1891. Birthplace is listed here, Monterey, Kentucky. Okay, even though it only says KY, we're allowed to expand names for the states. Okay, and name of newspaper, well, this is not a newspaper, so we don't put anything. Okay, we don't put funeral service record. You really only put something here if it's actually the name of a newspaper. Okay, next. So we're going to go through this. Who is the next person who is mentioned on this? It is here, spouse. Okay, so that's a relative. And since we know she was a woman, the spouse must be a man. That's her husband. And his name was Walter Williams. Okay, the next person is the father, relative, father, George Messick. Just Messick this time. Excuse me. Next is the mother, Kezia Ballard. Okay, going on. Next we have here the name of a physician, Wagner. That's a non-relative. And we don't know the given names. We just know it says Wagner. Okay, going on. Informant. Okay, and it doesn't tell us. Oh, here it does. Okay, relationship is the daughter. So, relative, daughter, Max, looks like Max Darlena Fulmer, Mrs. Okay, see if there's anyone else mentioned. Okay, services to be conducted by spouse William Messick. No, that can't be right. Sorry, Bishop, BP, Bishop, William Messick. Okay, so even though it says Messick, and we know that she is a Messick by birth, it doesn't say what the relationship is. So we have to make that a non-relative. William Messick. And BP, we don't expand the abbreviation when it's a title or term. Okay, and that's the bottom of the page. So we need to blank the rest of those. Okay, and that's that. So you see, the obituary projects are pretty complicated. These are just a couple of examples of the types of things that you could come across. So I really recommend, if you want to do these, to look through lots of examples, look through all of the presentations that have already been given. And but they're really fun and they're really interesting, and I hope that you have fun with indexing. Thanks for watching. Bye.